Well, hello, family. Back with another podcast. This time I was on the Question the Narrative podcast with Ricardo and David Shane. Those guys are awesome. Links in the description. Guys, please support their channels. But yeah, we did a deep dive, literally, into underground cities, and it was an awesome conversation. I know you guys will enjoy this content. And if you do enjoy it, please subscribe. And if you're listening on the audio-only podcast, please give me a 5-star review. I'd really appreciate it. Now, with that out of the way, guys, enjoy this podcast. God bless.
We've been utterly lied to about our history and our origins through scientism. Our timeline is completely messed up. We have no idea who we are or when we are. And we barely even understand where we are, considering all the deceptions around, the heliocentric model and the rest.
Well, the real danger is the fact that we are heading toward a post-human apocalypse.
There may be a connection between modern-day abductions and the ancient tale of the Nephilim.
If we don't understand the Genesis 3:15 narrative, the Messiah will crush your head, you will bruise his heel. That is the gateway to the entire rest of the biblical prophetic narrative.
Pergamum. They're in the city where Satan's throne is. Satan is the Prince of Rome. The Prince of Rome is Jupiter. The Prince of Rome is Zeus, because Satan is Zeus.
The end game, which is Armageddon, is going to be the emergence of a new golden age in which the gods walk openly among mankind as they did in the world before the flood of Noah. And there's no stopping it. It will happen.
What's up, everyone? We'd like to welcome you to another episode of Question the Narrative. I got David Shane with me, my co-host today, and we also got our special guest with us, a returning guest, JT. He needs no introduction, guys. Last time we had him on, we were talking about a lot of interesting things concerning the little season and just kind of thinking outside that box of what we're told that we should believe about certain doctrines and stuff like that. But it's great to have you back on, JT. How you doing, buddy?
Well, it's great to be back on. I'm doing excellent. How you guys doing?
Doing good. Good to see you, brother.
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm doing well. We have had a lot of interesting discussions in between the last time we had you on, and we got another one coming up tonight, and we're going to be talking about underground cities a little bit, right? And what else did you have on the table for us today?
Well, it's funny because I started this little different podcast series on my channel where I call it JT's Mixtape. And I just kind of just been showing, like, I take other people's videos and I just say, like, whatever's interesting. And I thought, like, that was a good way for me to, there's certain conversations you want to have about videos, but they're really not worth like a whole podcast. So I started sharing those kind of videos. But of course, I still focus on the things that we've been talking about, like old world stuff, mud flood stuff, Antiquitech, Meltology, all those kind of things. And it's funny, as we were discussing off air, I found a couple really interesting videos about like underground Seattle. And then there was this kind of viral video going around about underground LA. It might have been a goofy video, but just those kind of things. And I think it's really interesting to think about, like, potentially the mud flood, and then maybe some of the best evidence of the mud flood is literally all these underground places everywhere. And I think that, I think that really is worth, no pun intended, digging into.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So,
and go ahead, Jay. Sorry, Shane, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that is a very strong argument for that, because if like that was never taught in our history about a mud flood, anything like that, and there's just so much evidence that we could observe with our own eyes, like, okay, well, if this never happened, then why this? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense why things like that are hidden, or we're just never taught about. It's just kind of brushed under the rug. Why do you think that is? Especially, like, this is, natural disaster, what people would say. So like, why the big deal on this catastrophic event or natural disaster? You know?
Well, I think it just, to me, it's like, yeah, it's the whole mud flood thing. And I think that, again, like that's probably why a lot of people have come to along to the little season, because the idea of Tataria, the old world, whatever you want to call it, in this mud flood, it just like, it just seems like there's this part in our timeline that's really been interrupted. And I think as people who are, looking for the truth and Christians, we're like, if not possibly like the biggest conspiracy, like the little season, like what could that mean? It's hard to with a futurist mindset to say the tribulation's coming. We basically believe the history all along since Jesus, and then we're still looking for this third temple, this antichrist, this rapture scenario. So what do you do with this this completely bizarre thing? And you have all these people on the internet who are obviously doing great research about saying there seems to be strong evidence that there's this advanced civilization in our recent past. And so, like, what do you do with that? And then, so then you're thinking, like, so how did it end? And I think most people come to the conclusion that, yeah, there was some kind of cataclysm. Whatever you call it, the mud flood, call it whatever you want to, but like there's physical evidence of buried things everywhere. So there's parts of buildings are buried, but then you find out like full buildings are buried. Like literally, I said that you get into like the stuff like we're talking about, like how I was, kind of got on this subject was I saw this video about this woman talking about underground Seattle. And some people will say, oh yeah, well, they have underground parts of certain cities. But okay, my fallback on a lot of the stuff is, yeah, but where does that fit in the timeline? That I said, I think that the building of certain cities on the West Coast are already suspect based on how short of timeline all this stuff happened. But now you're doubling down by saying they built an older city and it's under the ground. And then the current city that's already suspect is built on top of this other one. Well, I'm thinking like, we're talking about like supposedly miners, right? Going out there looking for gold. They not only built one city, but they built another city under that. And when did they do that? No, but have you seen? So there was a video. Yeah, it was a viral video going around, and it was talking about like L.A. And it was like something about like this guy saying like he worked at Starbucks and his NDA expired. And he was talking about like the actor bond. What he was saying was like there's these tunnels, like there's this highway system that goes under all of L.A. and you can pop up in different locations. And of course, he mentions there's Starbucks under there and all this weird stuff. But I'm like, and I think it was almost like, to me, I was watching that video and I said, this kind of reminds me of when they reveal like truth in like goofy movies, like this, like the revelation of the method, because it was like, obviously, I don't believe that there's secret Starbucks. I mean, I don't doubt that could be true too, but I mean, like the point was, is like, that's ridiculous. It's just like the way it's presented. It was presented almost like a little comedy skit. But the guy's like, well, how old is this? And the guy's, well, it predates me. I think it could be all the way back to the 20s. Yeah, it's more like the 1720s. It's like, it's stuff that's like it's been there all along. And I said, so you talk about this. So they're in LA, there's underground stuff. I think there's underground stuff in San Diego. I think there's a big underground section of like Sacramento, Seattle, Portland, all the West Coast cities. So you're thinking about like if you already think about the very condensed timeline, like the idea that they had time to dig tunnels and do all this stuff. And like I said, it's kind of incomprehensible. Even so, I released a video today on my TikTok and all my social media stuff. It was from a podcast I did, but I was saying like, so just think about the timeline of like what the Western expansion in America is. Lewis and Clark, so what Thomas Jefferson makes a deal with Napoleon. They have the Louisiana Purchase. And so they purchase all this land west of the Mississippi. So then he gets Lewis and Clark to go explore. And so this is the 19th century. So all these cities are basically founded and like established during this same century. But I'm saying, like, can you even like think about what that even means? We're taught like, and if you see, like, go look it up, go look up your old history books, and they'll show pictures of Lewis and Clark going around with Sacagawea, you know, like literally stomping around. They're going on a little canoe. They're going around with like literally wearing like animal furs and stuff like that. And they're going to explore the western part of the country. Okay, so that's from 1803 to 1806. And then you see, like, then you go look into like the histories of some of these cities, like San Francisco. You have San Francisco in 1848, I believe there's only like 1,000 people there. And then, of course, then you go like you see the panorama shots in the 1870s, full grown city. Same, it's like this, literally, it's like the same old story. Pick a West Coast city. It's very similar. Around 1850, there was no one there. 20 to 30 years later, it's a full grown city. That to me, it just seems so unbelievable. I just can't wrap my head around how that would even be possible. I mean, because you just think about the logistics of going through the wilderness, and that's what we're told it was.
Yeah.
Are they chopping down trees and then eventually deciding, this is a good place to build a city? I mean, this part of the riverbank's good enough, so we're going to build a city right here. And not only that, when you see the cities, they're laid out perfectly, right? There's grid patterns, and who decides where what goes? Like, who did all that stuff? Where are the quarries at? Because all these cities are shown, they're made of brick and stone. You know, it's not like they just chop down trees and they're all log cabins. Even though it's funny when you start to see like the representation of these cities from like the 1850s, all they have is like illustrations of these places, and that's what they are. They're all made of wood. But the first pictures, they're all made of stone and brick. And so with that being said, yeah, and then there's underground stuff. And that's not even get into all the fact that all these places burned down multiple times. I think San Francisco, there was 6 great fires within like 30 years, and I think like 2 earthquakes too. The places were destroyed multiple times, and that's what was the story of Seattle, is that there was a great fire in Seattle in like the 1890s, and they said, "Oh, here's actually the full story." They said that they built Seattle, and all of a sudden it started flooding all the time. Like literally, they were saying like that they had life preservers on every street corner because it flooded so much.
What? I didn't know that.
This is the narrative. Like I said, this is what they literally say, and I'm like, why would they build a city where it floods all the time? There's a lot of land out that way, and so they said after the Great Fire, they thought they would take advantage of that by building on top of the city that burned down. And I'm like, I don't even know what that even means. You would still have to bury it, or like, did it burn literally to the ashes? Like, but no, obviously, if you've seen some of those pictures, have you ever seen that picture of Seattle that they had dug most of it out, and it looks like there's about 3 floors at least. It goes about 3 stories under the ground. And so the idea that they built on top of that a full city, don't you think? I mean, to me, it's like I really have a hard time wrapping my mind around the logistics of just starting a city from nowhere.
Yeah.
But not only that, when they say they built on top of it, it's like, wouldn't it be hard to build on buildings that just burned down? Like to make sure that I don't know, that maybe they're secure enough to build on top of, and just to level them out perfectly. You know, all the things that you would kind of think like, yeah, when you think about it for like 5 seconds, that doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like it'd be easier to build on a city that just burned down. But that's what they say. And so when you see it now, so now what they have is they have parts of these places that are literally like kind of like almost a little cool tourist place. Hey, check it out. We got this cool underground part of the city. And they're like, isn't it weird that they did this way back in the day? And I'm thinking like, yeah, it is weird. It's so weird that I don't believe it. It doesn't make it makes no sense whatsoever. And I think that, to me, I think that is only part of what we're seeing. Like, this is only part of the story. When you hear there's tunnels under LA that are for driving, I literally think that it's likely that whatever this mud flood was, however it happened, I think that there literally are cities under these cities. Like, that's why when you see like abandoned subway systems in like places like New York, they're way too vast to just have been like, oh, we just they overbuilt the subway lines and stuff like that. And like you said, you see these things in the movies all the time. Like you think of even like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You know, like there's in those scenes, like they're just living in the sewers under there. But you're like, have you ever stopped to think there's a lot of room down there?
Yeah.
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 I mean, I know that's just a movie, it's just a comic book, but you know what I'm saying? Like, but you see that kind of stuff all the time where there's abandoned parts of these cities, there's underground parts. And it's like, I think when you don't think about it too deeply, it's okay, well, it's fine. But when you think about like timelines, and I said, I think that's like, it's the easiest to expose when you go west, because these cities already have a very short timeline. You think like in New York, you're like, oh, well, it's an old city, so whatever. These other cities are not old. I mean, they're literally only like just over 100 years old, most of them.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you about how vast you thought those underground cities were, but you think that it's just like these big old huge cities underground, and then maybe there's some sort of passageways where only a few people know about, and they do their business underground, or what are you thinking about all that?
I mean, you know, so it's funny that I go back to like one of my first kind of like bigger videos. I did videos about the Denver airport. And so I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people know that under the Denver airport, there's like miles longs of tunnels and stuff like that. Tons of infrastructure under the Denver airport. And so at one point, a lot of people said, oh, those tunnels, they likely go really far. Some people thought they could go to NORAD. So NORAD is over in like the Cheyenne Mountain Complex is over like kind of Colorado Springs. So it's about 90 miles away. And so I remember thinking like that makes perfect sense that they would go there. It's like they have this secure facility under this mountain, which is crazy. The more I think about it now, it's like, I wonder how much of that stuff might have already been there and how much did they build? Because we're told the Cheyenne Mountain Complex has, I think it was like 15 buildings on springs under the mountain. Like they literally describe it being an underground city. And so I was like, okay, it actually makes sense that if you have miles longs of tunnels going under the Denver airport, why wouldn't they try to connect it? Because like you have this major airport, if you could go underground, you could get down there. And so anyways, all that being said, I started to wonder why they built the Denver airport where they did. That some people complained at the very beginning because I guess the old Denver airport was very close to the city. And this one's like 20 miles outside the city. It's kind of far. And I thought, what if because I knew about the tunnels, I said, what if they built it there because it was over tops of tunnels? You know, what if there was already tunnels that kind of went that way and they could connect with other tunnels, they could dig stuff down into the ground. And the more I'm thinking about it, I'm like, so there's always been these rumors, and this is all they are. I don't know anything about this more than anybody else does, is some people have said that there's these kind of transcontinental like trains and electric trains and stuff underground. The more I start to like look into this stuff, I think it's less far-fetched, because you find out like in all these major cities, there's tunnel systems under all of them. So where does it end? You know, like what could have been under there? And like, I don't know, because I mean, based on the timeline we're told about, which we don't believe. No, I would believe it'd be impossible for them to dig out tunnels, you know, across the country.
Yeah.
But if they were already there, now it actually makes sense. It makes sense. I think that's the kind of thing where we know about deep underground military bases. We always shown in the movies all these really sketchy things happening under the ground in like Nevada and places like that, Colorado. What if that stuff was already there? I think it makes a lot more sense than it was already there, because I think that just logistically, just think about, okay, here's a good example of it. I think it took them 17 years to dig the Gothard Tunnel. You ever heard that?
Where is that?
So the Gothard Tunnel is in Switzerland. Remember, it's like near CERN. That's where they did that super demonic opening ceremony over there.
Yeah.
So that was like one of the biggest boring things through this mountain to create, you know, like whatever, that tunnel for the road. And that was it's in close vicinity of CERN. So that's a big deal. I mean, like, obviously they had to have super advanced equipment to do all that stuff and then eventually do it. Even we hear, like, they always try to tell us what the inside of the Earth's like, but we know that they've only supposedly dug down 8 miles.
Right.
Right.
So if it was that easy to dig through the ground, I think they would do more of it. But they don't.
That's true.
So
That's a good point.
What if a lot of that stuff was already there? Because it is real difficult. And I think that based on what we know about the society that they don't talk about that was before us, they were really good at manipulating stone, cutting stone. So maybe they had a better way, and maybe they did it all, or maybe some of the stuff was literally above the ground, and now it's not. So were they digging tunnels, or maybe were they uncovering things that were already there? Big cities, maybe.
Yeah, that would kind of seem a little bit more logical to me. The second part, just it all got buried. You know what I'm saying? In this cataclysm, and somehow it's survived and remained, and we're just figuring it all out. You know what I mean? But for like, because I was just thinking about what you said, that hole that they were trying to dig down. It was like 8 miles, like you said. And I can't remember exactly how long it took them to do that, but it took a very long time. And like what you're saying, even under the Denver airport, there's something that goes like 90 miles underneath the ground. Is that what you said?
Well, I would say that they denied this, for one. They denied this. I mean, people have often wondered if the Denver airport goes to NORAD. Because I said, because I made one of my first YouTube videos I made about that, and I was saying, I think it makes sense. Like that, if you could do that, it would make sense to do that. Like that, if something really bad happened, you have this major airport you could get to, and you go right under the ground.
Yeah,
I was saying, especially with the murals, I was like, especially if they're predicting what's going to happen, if they could get there real fast, and then they could go under the ground, and they could get to this super secure facility. So they've denied that.
Yeah, but my point is just like to bore a tunnel that far, it could take centuries. I mean, couldn't it? I mean, if you just really think about it, because I think it took a lot of years to even do the 8 miles. I can't remember exactly how long it was, but it makes more sense. Like what you're saying, that stuff was already here, and we just kind of, hey, look what I found.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so, or they don't say what they found. I guess that's the thing. It's like, because I was saying like that. I think that, to me, it seems like they make those goofy videos, kind of like Revelation of the Method. Oh, there's the actor bond with Starbucks underground, and everyone kind of, haha, that sounds goofy. And then it's like, but no, but for real, there's stuff under the ground in LA. And then then they show this cool little tourist area in like cities like Sacramento and Portland and Seattle. Oh, look, you can go under the ground. Hey, look, there's storefronts under here. Isn't this weird? And you're like, so they make it like, okay, we're going to show you a very small part of this, but like the whole city's you think about how big these cities are. They are not unclear about it. They're saying they built this city on top of another city. So if you really think about this, just like Shane's got a basement, you think about the footprint of your house. Like, think about the footprint of a city, and think about multiple floors of stories of things under a place like Seattle. And then you said, and even that, it's like, we don't know where it ends. I mean, and of course, we would never believe them if they told us, because we could never be sure. And I do think that's the kind of stuff, that's the scary part about stuff that's inside the earth. It's like, I wouldn't even want to go explore it. Like, who knows? Like, yeah, you find the wrong part of it. It's like, yeah, you might not come up to the surface. So like that we know that based on ancient mythologies, there's all kinds of stuff under the earth. I do think it's interesting, like that the Native American mythologies, the Indian mythologies from back in the day, was that they all came from inside the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Like they have these mythologies about the world ended like 3 different times. And then they lived inside the earth with like spider grandma and stuff like that. You ever heard that mythology?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was the Aztecs and some of these other Native Americans. They have this thing where they believed in 7 sacred tribes, and they all lived inside the earth. And I think the Aztecs specifically said when they came up to the surface, there was giants there.
Oh,
Giants
wow.
were there, and they're the ones who built like the stuff in Mexico and South America, like the pyramids and everything.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the Hollow Earth
Mm-hmm.
documentary by the Fall Brothers?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was interesting to me too, because it kind of it's weird. I don't understand how they can think that the earth is hollow, but it's like it's a globe at the same time too. So that kind of boggles my mind. But I mean, that makes a lot more sense to me with, just what we try to teach, biblical cosmology, and that in the Bible it actually talks about Satan moving to and fro, and then it even says in the earth, like
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
he's like inside the earth, like underground, and like you said, all these mythologies where some of these beings or creatures were coming out of the water. That's another thing, the water or the ground, like there's so much under there that we just we don't know about.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting to think like from the mythologies, and of course, when I first the Hollow Earth Chronicles was one of the very first kind of like Christian type conspiracy documentaries I ever watched, and I was just like, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my whole life, and then you see it, but I was like, obviously the more I research this, I get it. It's like most of the stuff they said was not crazy. Now it's like most of the stuff is, it's just you didn't know that, you didn't know that their gods live under the ground and Gartha and Shambhala and all that stuff. But I do think this is a quite a wrinkle in this idea, is that because it's one thing when we talk about like mythologies about like the Hindu stuff and the weird, like, almost like the whole, what is it, like the land of the lost and all that weird stuff that's like inside the earth. Because I could almost, in my mind, I thought, okay, so if these their gods were like the fallen angels, potentially like the Watchers, or the ones that Jude's talking about, Peter's talking about, the ones who are inside the earth, I could almost see like how the devil would deceive them to think, oh, well, it's a good place where your gods are at, even though like biblically we would know it's a really bad place. But they would still have these mythologies about how great it is down there because that's where their gods live. But I was thinking about like ancient stuff. But it's interesting if you think about like, what if not all the stuff is ancient down there? It's possible that some of this old stuff could connect with some ancient stuff, but maybe a lot of it's not that old. It's kind of like in the same way that we would think like Roman stuff is really old, but then you see Roman stuff in Washington, D.C., and you're like, well, what if this stuff is not as old as we think it is? Or maybe the stuff in Washington, D.C. is just as old as that. It's kind of like in the whole mindset of the little season. If you've been lied to about all these things, like, I'm not sure what is like how old anything would be. I could look at my biblical timeline, but like I said, we don't even really know how far it's been since the first century. We can only speculate and we can only guess based on like some things that we know happen. But I mean, like our lifetime is so limited to really think about that. It's really hard to like really square that. Like when we're starting, it's kind of like revisiting like that whole concept of the hollow earth based on what we know now. It's like, man, it's pretty trippy to think about.
Yeah. So like the underground tunnels, I meant to ask you, what's the mainstream like narrative as to when they were dug or built? When did they? Is there like a narrative on that?
Like which ones? Are you talking about just like these underground cities?
Yeah, the underground cities, the tunnels, like were they like the one under Denver Airport, the ones in L.A. Like, is there a mainstream narrative about the timeline those were supposedly built in or dug or created?
No, I think that's what I'm saying. Like, I think that what they, like, if you talk about like Seattle, for instance, I think they literally said that stuff got under the ground around the 1890s. So like, I don't know that the mainstream even acknowledges that there's tunnels under LA.
Okay, gotcha.
But all these other cities, they all kind of have like their similar timelines. It's kind of like just by the way, They
Right.
built this city. Oh yeah, by the way, they built this other city under it a while ago. Like it's kind of almost like that. Yeah, that's why I said I feel like it's almost like that they put this little goofy tourist destination part of it, kind of like Atlanta. Like, why is there an underground Atlanta? And it's like, but we're only showing like a little shopping mall area type place under the ground. I mean, do you guys really think that's the depths of it?
No.
You wouldn't build that just for that.
No.
It makes no sense. So like that,
Right.
it's likely that establishes that there's things under the ground. So like the Denver airport, I'm sure that they would tell you that they built it all when they dug the airport. But what's interesting again about the Denver airport is a lot of people who've researched this. I think the airport was supposed to be about $2 billion to funded. That was the budget for the thing, but it cost twice that much. It cost twice that much. It took way longer than it was supposed to, and not only that, very recently, that was the funny thing. It's like, so if you research that, everybody points to we're really sus about this whole process because it cost so much more than it was supposed to. It took way longer than it was supposed to, and it was $4 billion. But then when I made my video, they were in the process of renovating the airport for $4 billion. So that was as much as that. So it was 2 times basically over budget, and then they were going to renovate it for as much as it cost to build in the first place. So if you really think about that kind of thing, about the way that, like, if government wanted to do shady stuff or they wanted to hide stuff, obviously we'd have no idea if they were doing things under the ground with that stuff. But do you remember that movie? Was it Independence Day?
Mm-hmm.
And there was that scene where was it? I forgot the actor's name, but they go under the ground, and then I think it might have been even the president, or was it Jeff Goldblum or something like that? It's like, how do they fund this? How does this get by Congress? And then he's like, the one guy's like, what do you think they really pay $50,000 for a hammer, a toilet seat? It's kind of like those kind of things where people joke that this is in the budget. Can you believe they spent this much on toilet paper in the budget? It's like, no, obviously that money is there to go to something else.
Yeah.
And so I think that maybe that's the real thing when they're renovating the things. Maybe that's when they're doing all the craziest stuff.
Yeah, what's interesting, going back to that documentary about the Hollow Earth, I think it was Tim Alberino who had made mention about it, and it's like there's these things that are underground and these people know about it, and like you were saying, they just build stuff on top of those old like monuments or something. Like it's like some sacred thing, like they know about it but you don't, and they buy up all these locations and they park like a building on top of it or something. Or even the Catholic Church goes and builds a bunch of stuff on over those underground whatever it is, you know what I'm saying?
No, definitely. I mean, I remember them specifically talking about that. And I think he was talking about that there was this tunnel system. I think he called it the Chicana that was in South America. And yeah, he was saying like that it's very common that the Catholic Church was building churches on top of these ancient sites.
Yeah.
And so I remember I watched a episode of that Ancient Apocalypse, the Graham Hancock show on Netflix. And they talked about that the biggest pyramid in the world, or at least the one we kind of know of, is in Cholula, or maybe it's either called Cholula, maybe that's a city, and it's not biggest because it's the tallest. It's like the base of it is like, I think they said it was like 3 times as big as like the Great Pyramid in Giza, but it's covered in grass and dirt and whatever, so like you really wouldn't know. And I remember in the show it was kind of like they were kind of almost like clowning on the Catholic Church, saying, oh, they didn't realize they built their church on top of this ancient pyramid. And you're like, how naive is everybody? Like, does anybody really believe they didn't build it there on purpose? So because they built it literally right on the top. And if you didn't know, you'd look at it, looks like they built it on a giant hill. But of course, there's tunnels that go from the church into the pyramid.
Yep.
And I remember thinking about this at the time. Of course, without the mud flood idea, it was like they were saying that there was multiple pyramids. Like there was a pyramid on top of another pyramid. And I was trying to think, like, how does that work? Like, how did they do that? Like, how did the ground come up? So like there was, I mean, I really do wonder now, like that if you see the mud flood evidence again, like you think about like when you talk about like Sardis, Turkey, and the book, the stuff in the Book of Revelation of these cities, and you see stuff that's 20 feet under the ground. Like I send Vitaly and like Paul from Understanding Conspiracy. I send them all the time because I think in my Google kind of news feed, it always features me these certain kind of stories. Every day almost, I see like articles about, hey, they just discovered this city under this city. They just discovered this building under here. And it's sometimes it's like 15 meters under the ground. 15 meters, what is that, like 45 feet?
Yeah.
That's crazy. Like, so you really do think about it. It's like this whole idea. I remember like seeing that kind of meme that was going around, and it was showing like that the pyramids were just the tops of these giant obelisks. And I know that's probably a little bit much, but is it? Like now I really have no idea, because it's like we really don't know what we're looking at. Because like it's really interesting. Was that movie Till Dusk Till Dawn? You guys ever seen that one?
I think so. Is it like a vampire movie or something?
It's interesting. It's interesting that it is vampires, and it's very campy.
Okay.
It's like this crazy kind of horror movie. It starts out as a completely different movie, but at the end of it, it's like, so they go to like the strip club or this bar or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And that's where all the vampires are. And then at the end, they pan back, and it's literally just the top of this giant kind of step pyramid. And and I feel like that, like they really are saying something right there. Because I mean, for one thing, it's like, so we as Christians would not believe in vampires like they're presented on TV, but like there's more like this. It's this old demonic element, like this ancient demonic element to society, and it's an underground thing. You really think about it. So these beings are meant to like in the dark. Yeah, they come from dark places, and they only really come out at night.
Yeah.
And they're literally bloodsuckers. And so you think about that kind of mindset, like that. Yeah, like what kind of evil is under the ground? I mean, for one, we know, just like if you want to just say like it's a possibility that there are kind of these cryptid type beings still. I believe that's possible.
Yeah.
But if you just wanted to mention just like the fact that people always talk about celebrities being like these bloodsuckers and being, like basically staying young by doing weird stuff with blood and things like that, that the kind of people that we know, like who are influencers, like in like the world, they would, you go back to that video about them saying like the actor bond. It's the actors that have access to these tunnels, but not everyone else. And these are the kind of people that have islands, places that do wicked stuff to children. Are these the kind of people that, like I said, is that kind of more like an allegory for the real evil? It's like these people who do wicked things, and they would do them under the ground and away from prying eyes.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, just kind of playing off the whole vampire thing, because it's like they're kind of human, but then they're not really human. They're these hybrids as well. And it's almost like, just can you become that basically by choice? You know what I mean? I know that in the movies, it's like, oh, they got bit because they were hungry, but it's like, I mean, just kind of like that Faustian bargain type thing, you know what I mean? Like, I'll do this in order to gain this kind of thing, you know what I mean? Like, and if they were to enhance themselves genetically on purpose to, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like it's like all in the movies and stuff like that. And I just kind of wonder if all that has some merit, and these creatures, they live under the ground, they're very powerful, they got a whole unit, they got ranks, and you know what I mean? It's crazy to think about. But
well, I have so many movie references going through my head now, like that relate to all that stuff. I think just in the recent movie was that it was called Morbius. That was he was like a Spider-Man villain. I think it had what's his name in it, Jared Leto. and he was like a doctor, and I think he got some kind of illness, and he was going to cure it by, using some kind of bat blood. Of course, we heard this story before, and yeah, so eventually it turns him into some kind. He heals him, but then he becomes like like a vampire. But yeah, what was really crazy. I saw a movie not too recently. It's an older movie, and it's based on an even older movie. It was called The Time Machine. You guys ever seen that? It had Guy Pearce in it. I think it came out like the early 2000s.
Was it kind of like was it a comedy, or was it a more like serious movie?
No, it was a serious movie. It was like, like I said, it was based. I think it was based on a book, and I think they made a movie about it, like kind of like way back in the day. But this was an interesting movie. It was like, so this guy from like the 1800s invented a time machine. I think it said something to do with like his girlfriend getting murdered, and then like he was trying to prevent it, and so he kept on trying to change things, and eventually like he was going through time enough where eventually like he got injured and he got put way into the future. So far into the like he goes in the future where you would think like look futuristic to us, but then he went so far into the future that it was like things regressed almost back. It almost looked like what you would call caveman days. And so, anyways, in this part, like he goes into like the way distant future, and the people are living like up high. They're living like on cliffs, like up like in the cliffs and stuff like that, because there's threats from things that are coming up from the earth. And there's these like almost these monsters that come up and they snatch people and they bring them down. So when he goes down into the earth, eventually like so somebody gets kidnapped that he cares for, and he's willing to go down there to try to get them. And so there's like kind of these genetically modified people that are kind of like almost like these Nephilim types that like real quick, but they're really stupid. But they literally are just to go get food for the people who really run the place. And these people are like kind of really white skins, really light hair, like kind of like almost like piercing like eyes. And they actually have like little kind of almost like spikes on their backs, like where their spine is. And I think they even communicate telepathically and stuff like that. Really creepy. But what was interesting about that in the movie, there was some problem with the moon or something like that. The moon was falling or something like that. And point being, there was some kind of cataclysm, and they went inside the earth, and they were normal people before they did this. So they went down into the earth, and they were going to ride out this apocalypse. And then so by the time they tried to come back up, when it was safe to go up to the surface, they could not survive up there anymore. So they had to live inside the earth. And so the longer they lived inside the earth, the more they kind of became mutated, and they started to change. And obviously then they only looked at the people on the surface as food. And I started to think about that. Of course, you think about like even biblically, that the book of Revelation, Jesus himself talks about like how the people are going to, the mighty men, these people are going to try to go hide themselves in the rocks and the cliffs and the mountains. And you do wonder like, well, what would happen if you put a person, what if you put like generation after generation after generation, and they only lived inside the earth? Is it possible these people could literally genetically change while they were down there? And I started to think about it. I was like, man, if that's like an allegory for a thing, or maybe that's even like a real thing, like maybe what if people really did live down there, and they did become like cannibalistic, bloodsucker type things, and you're like, oh my gosh, like that actually makes sense. And that actually that's a really frightening thought. Like, do you think about like that? What if during like whatever that cataclysm was we talk about, the mud flood or whatever it was, what if it was from the times of Jesus that people like went under the ground, like literally trying to avoid the wrath of the Lamb, and these people lived under there that whole time? And what if that's why? What if that is like this coordinated evil that's kind of running the place? Is like these people who used to be people, but they're really not people anymore.
Oh wow, that's a good little theory.
It makes sense. It makes sense why some people could be so sick and evil.
Yeah.
Because they're people, but they're really not people anymore. Like they really are just like they're different.
Yeah.
Than we are now.
They lost their humanity basically. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just a natural
it's frightening because it's almost
compassion.
Well, you know, it's funny too, and then you go into like the more comic book stuff. Is like you had that Spider-Man villain called the Lizard. And so he had like a missing arm,
Yeah.
and he was trying to use like the lizard DNA to regrow his arm. And of course, what happens? He becomes a lizard. Then you get into like the idea of reptilians and stuff like that. And then even like there was an old G.I. Joe movie. Actually, the very first G.I. Joe, the movie back in the day, back in the 80s. You guys ever watch that show?
No.
I don't think
Well,
so.
there was a really weird part where they went to this place and it was called, the bad guys were called Cobra La. And they lived under the mountains in the Himalayas. And the main bad guy was like, it was almost like they were this ancient race. And this guy was like staying alive by like, he was becoming more like lizard-like because he was, part of his body was like made out of like organic type weird things with like, you know, like he had like a snake body and stuff like that. And I was just like, you know what? I was like, it's like those kind of things that are like, they're so weird that they're almost like, that's so creepy that it kind of actually seems like it could be real. I don't know what it is about it, but I just thought like, when I saw that thing in that Time Machine movie, I was like, seems like who we're dealing with. These seem like the real bad guys here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just like it's just a generational thing. And that, when you said that about, you know, because us as people, we're able to adapt to our environment to survive. You know what I'm saying? So like that is kind of crazy to think about, just like a, you know, underground race of people. And you know, I was thinking too about the whole underground thing in I think it's that Wakanda Forever, where you got the underground or the underwater people civilization too. You know, that's kind of that's kind of crazy. There's just like entire city under the water, and these people, they've just I say that loosely, have just adapted to their environment.
Yeah, like Aquaman, like there's a whole city down there and a whole different, you know, breed of people.
That's the kind of like the Atlantis mythologies, right?
Yeah.
That's where that comes from. Because I think Aquaman, I know actually what in that movie, it's kind of weird they took a twist on it, but like, yeah, in the Wakanda thing, it was like that Prince Namor. So Prince Namor was the Submariner, and he was the Prince of Atlantis. And of course, you think about Atlantis in the movies, like even Aquaman himself, I think he was the Prince of Atlantis, but he was like a kind of a Nephilim type because he was like part Atlantean and he was part human.
Yeah, like a hybrid.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird things with that. I think that you just think about like just genetically too, like that you like pigs, like feral pigs. Like you can take a pig that's like a farm pig and like you just let them out in the wild and they all of a sudden they start growing like dark hair.
Really?
Yeah. Like, do you ever heard that these pigs get off these farms and they turn into wild boars? They start growing tusks and thick hair, and it's like, it's not like generations it takes. It's like literally they start doing this, and it's like that is some of the weirdest things that like that I don't really understand how that works, but like there's something about it. Obviously it must produce some kind of a hormone that gets revved up, and maybe it is like the whole idea like that could humans change if they were exposed to this kind of different environment. And I mean, it makes sense. Obviously, if you think about like you're in a dark room all the time, obviously your eyes adapt to the dark. But how much else adapts to the dark? And
there's a lot of crazy talk about just genetic manipulation, and I know that a lot of people have given their DNA freely to these companies that are collecting all your DNA and stuff. And I just kind of wondered, like, well, what's the whole purpose in that? And it's almost like, you know, they're getting all this DNA stuff, but it's like they're looking for a specific thing just to see who has it. That way they could use it. That way they could use it for their experiments, their maybe like super soldier programs or something like that. Or even, you know, I've listened to a lot of Sasquatch testimonies and shows and all that, and there's even people that, you know, they talk about Dogman and stuff, and that they, like, some people think that maybe some of these creatures that they've seen have possibly been like genetically manipulated. And it's like, if you guys remember on the Winter Soldier, it's like he says a code to him, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden it just goes into this mode where it's like defender, and you got this objective, and do the objective and come back, report back to us, and it's just like a robot. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's like
And
the
there's
MK Ultra stuff.
yeah, and there's people that have speculated that they actually have these crazy creatures as like defenders around these bases and stuff like that, just to kind of ward people off,
Oh, yeah.
and
Well, what's funny is like I have heard that some people, one of the
Makes
craziest
sense.
things I heard, I can't remember if it was on Blurry Creatures or something like that back in the day when I used to listen to that show, and it was talking about like the Bigfoots had something to do with the gray aliens. It was like somehow the Bigfoots were like enforcers to some kind of alien race, and I was just like, what am I listening to? But with that being said, I do think it's interesting. Did you guys watch that show Fallout? It was based on the video game.
yeah.
Okay,
That reminded me about what you were saying. Like they came up and they're like, no, not ready yet.
Oh yeah, that's right. We did talk about that. So the interesting part about that show is that there was the underground sections, they called them, they were basically bunkers, but they called them vaults. And so each corporation had like their own system of vaults. And like they openly say in the show, like, oh, you can do whatever you want with it. They're all little different science experiments. You can run your vault how you want to, and you can see who wins at the end. And then so funny how like we know how the world works, that they're saying this vault's going to be run by the scientists. So we know this is going to be the best one. But obviously that was the sickest one because they were doing experiments on people. And there was like, I think in the one, there was like some kind of fish looking person or something, like, these women who look like obviously completely deformed. At one point they encounter this monster that's completely just sick.
They're like zombies, aren't they?
Well,
They're really crazy.
There's the zombies, but I remember there was that kind of almost like frog fish monster thing, whatever. It was like some kind of I think they talked about it have something to do with like the radiation, but it was like it was just
that was in the water.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So I started to think about it, like what if a lot of the cryptid stuff we're told about that? What if they are just genetic experiments? Like, what if like that's kind of the thing? And like, obviously that's one reason why the government would never acknowledge a Bigfoot or anything like that, because they can't.
That makes sense.
Could it be like that some of these, like the gray alien stuff, are those just demons, or could it be some kind of physical entity that was like, what if those things were like human, like again, like we were talking about, like what if those things were more human at one point and it was like years living in, generation after generation being under the earth, and then that's what they became.
Yeah.
These weird thing. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I do believe that the alien phenomenon is demonic, but I guess at the same time, like, yeah, what could be if you had hundreds of years, you had wicked experiments, all the weird stuff they're doing there. It also makes sense that like they talk about beings like Bigfoot or some of these others that they say almost like these things come out like portals or something like that.
Yeah.
What if they weren't portals? What if they were just different places on the earth, like basically that they could go under the earth and then they could pop up other places? They didn't just magically appear, like there's different access points to.
There's so much mystery that surrounds Sasquatch and stuff, because even people have had these encounters where they say it's like the sound was turned off in the forest or something like that. Like there's just complete silence, like silence that can be felt, and they're like, what is going on here? And it's just like some people have thought, well, are they like crossing over some sort of dimensional thing, or does everything in the forest just know like the alpha is here and we need to shut up? Like it's just crazy. And then also these orbs have been connected to Sasquatch sightings as well, and so that would kind of be weird for me to connect, like if it was just an experiment gone wrong, just because the orbs have been connected to a lot of the sightings as well. But just as far as there's this big creature, how come no one can track it down and stuff like that? But One thing that I have thought is that just like, have you seen, I forget which kind of octopus it is, and if they just even go towards anything, they touch it and then they'd like turn into it and look like it. Do you know which kind of octopus I'm
Oh,
talking about? Have you
I've
seen
seen
those?
what you're talking about, but that's it's
Yeah,
crazy how they can
but
camouflage.
I think
Yeah.
that the reason why we can't keep track of them is I believe that they might have some sort of capability like that, like where they can cloak themselves in a sense, which sounds crazy, but if you think about what we were talking about, just being able to adapt to your environment, how much, and I don't want this to sound like tree hugger, new agey thing, but if we were just less in touch with all our technology, all of social media and everything like that, and just like we were living on the land, and you like, you know, become one with your environment, like would we be able to like tap into something spiritually that we could never do because we're so distracted here, you know what I mean? Because everything, um I feel like a lot of people back then, and we may have talked about this, but I feel like we don't see a lot of like miracles and mass and stuff like that like we used to, and I think it's just because of the Christianity today, and I'm guilty of it too. We get busy with our own lives, but
Hmm.
like how I'm just questioning how much could we tap into this spirit of ours and our connection with God if we weren't surrounded by all the distractions. And so like if these creatures or whatever are in the forest or whatever, they're adapting to their own environment to, you know, for survival or whatever else, you know, because a lot of people, like old Indian stories and stuff like that, they like communicated with these Sasquatch beings, and it's like the Sasquatches would come to their rituals and stuff like that. It's like they're interested in that. It's like something spiritual even with all of that too, which is
Hmm.
kind of crazy to think about.
Well, I do think that our environment obviously can be manipulated by some kind of belief. You know, that's
Mm.
what Jesus basically says. It's like that your faith has healed you. You know, it's
Yeah.
like your faith in me. And I wonder, and I think I was just thinking about that as you were saying that. I was the way I see it too, and I'm like, you really think about it, like that. The apostles didn't have to have a lot of faith after Jesus appeared to them.
Mhm.
No, they
You know
knew.
that they knew. It's kind of like that. People were saying. I remember I heard a good quote about David, and they were like, David wasn't brave. He believed, like, you know, like he knew like that he was going to kill that giant. You know, you'd be brave if you didn't know. It was like that he obviously, if you you know the read the account, he was just like this is going to happen.
Mm.
You know, so he wasn't. It wasn't that he was brave. Like he knew it was going to happen. So like in the same way that if the apostles saw Jesus after he was resurrected and they saw him ascend to heaven and everything, if Jesus told you to go do something, you would obviously have no doubt like to go do it. Like, you know what I mean? If he literally saw the resurrected king and you were like, he said, go do this. And he would say, I want you to go heal that person. You would just go up and you would just know what happened. I want you to just go cast that demon out of that person. You would just say, get out. You know, like you would just go because you just like, you were just told.
Mhm.
And then like we live in a day and age where it's like that we really have to almost like decalcify our brains in order to like believe like we're really supposed to, because we just don't know.
Yeah.
Like we're walking around, we're seeing everybody else, and like how do we know that this is not the right way? You know, it's difficult to try to like to recapture that. And I think that sometimes I really do think that maybe that is the big lie in like the little season, is that, oh no, you have to wait till all this other stuff's gonna, you know, you have to wait. When what if you realize that the Jesus on the throne right now, like the saints are resurrected ruling, and you have that kind of authority, like right now, like you don't have to wait for that. Like you could go do the things that you're told to do. You could do whatever is necessary. And if you really believe that you could you do it? You know what I'm saying? Like, and you can imagine if that was the different mindset of all the Christians who aren't just waiting, sitting on their hands, waiting for something to happen. When it was like, if we all believe like that, like how different would would all this stuff be?
Yeah.
You know, I do wonder that, because I do think it's like I've even thought about it, like that if the devil is written about like in the times of the apostles, that he's the god of this world and he's blinded the eyes of unbelievers. But in the mindset of, if we're in the little season, is he still the god of this world? If Jesus has all authority and he's got control over all the nations, is he still the god? I mean, you could say he's the god to people who worship him, but is he the god of this world? If you said, no, he's not the god, you know, Jesus is king. And we all live like that. Like, you know, because you do think like these bloodsuckers, whether they're physical beings or they're just like the demons, are like, you know, energy parasites. Like, you know, like they feed on our fear and our disbelief and our sin. And if we lived a different kind of way and a different kind of mindset, I do wonder if like how much a difference would that make? I mean, I believe obviously it would make all the difference in the world. I think this place would be totally different. That everybody walked like they were really, you know, doing something in the name of the king of the universe.
Yeah.
Go do it. And like, yeah, I wonder how much different things could be. And I do think that like maybe those kind of beings, like especially out there, if they are some kind of demonic entity, how much stronger they get when people are freaking out, afraid when they're near.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just like what you're saying, how different would everything be? The first thing that I was thinking of is there would be no need for hospitals. You know, if you got a believing Christian, a group of people, why can't you just go in that hospital and just heal someone of cancer on their deathbed,
Exactly.
and they get up and walk away? You know what I'm saying? And it's just because like I'm not doing that. You know what I mean? It's like like we have this barrier or something. Like we're not connected the way we should be. There's something that's in the way. There's like I guess, I don't know, like a barrier is the best way I could explain it, but like we don't have that faith to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
it's kind of
because
like
if we did, then we should be, and it would give God all kinds of glory. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I wonder, it is kind of almost like in that movie, The Matrix. And I think The Matrix is more of a Gnostic movie, but it is interesting to think like the way that Neo becomes the one in the movie is like that he's willing to sacrifice himself. So like he knew that he could save Morpheus if he was willing to die to do it. And then so when he did it, and of course then he didn't die. And then he realized it really was just about him believing he could do it. And that was the difference. And that made him, because it was kind of like, you think I'm going to be able to dodge bullets? He's like, no, when you're ready, you won't need to. Like, I do think it's like, can you imagine if like that is like the belief that you go into where you like, you know, is like, you don't have to doubt, like, you know, this is going to happen. And I think, I mean, it's easier. Well, obviously it's very easy to say. It's way harder to do and actually believe like that. I mean, I'm not saying like that. I'm not being critical of other people. I'm saying like that. I'm just really trying to understand. Is like, is that really what Jesus is? Is that what he's trying to convey to them? I mean, I think it is, because that's what he's like basically saying. Like that. I think it's always crazy when you think about like that Peter gets out of the boat. You know, he's like, Jesus, call me. You know, it's like, it's funny. Like he knew that he's like, he wasn't getting out of the boat without Jesus telling him to get out. So he gets out, and obviously he's the only one who got out of the boat to go walk on the water. And then he starts to sink, and Jesus even says, "Oh, you have little faith." And it's like, for the rest of us, like, gosh, he got out of the boat though. Like, you know, like that's
No
pretty
one else did.
hardcore. Yeah, nobody else got out of the boat, but even Jesus. But obviously Jesus is holding him to a standard like that. Obviously, because he's pushing him to the level where he's going to do all the things he's going to do later. But it's kind of crazy to think like that we could do things like that if we only believed. But yeah, at the same time, I guess it's harder for us because we have not seen like that. And this is what we've known. And I think that I do pray that obviously that's I know that God knows that we're only getting this because we're reading and we're like, wow, is that what we're supposed to be doing? And like, we're still trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's a really, I've wondered about that for a long time. Did you guys hear about that story? I think it was several years ago. There was this Christian couple, and they had a little newborn baby, and the baby got sick, and they took the baby to the church, and had the deacons and everybody pray over it, and they were praying over it, and everybody's like, take the baby to the doctor. Like, no, man. They were like, I got faith. God's going to heal our baby. And they kept going like that, kept going, never took the baby to the doctor. And they had a tremendous amount of faith that God was going to heal their baby.
Mm-hmm.
The baby ended up dying. They got charged with like manslaughter or negligent homicide because it ended up being a simple like bacterial infection that the doctor could have cured with antibiotics. But they had a ton of faith. It just, so
Yeah, that's tough. I was hoping that story was going to turn out different, David.
yeah, it
Yeah.
turned out bad. It turned out bad.
I mean, that is the other side of it. It's like, yeah, that I mean, I guess that's the thing that it's always kept me from like certain prayers of like that. I do hate that kind of like the word of faith healers, and they're saying like, oh, you didn't believe enough. And
Yeah.
it's because I do think that like there's examples again, like I know that Timothy's sick in the Bible, and it's like Paul's got a thorn in the side, whatever, if that's a spiritual issue or it's not, like that God decided that he was not going to heal certain people, and so to think like that, I believe that God could do anything he wants to, and I have no doubt about that. But is this what he wants?
Yeah.
Is it does he want someone to be healed of cancer? If he does, obviously, I know that it'll happen. Like I know God, anything that God wants will happen. But is that what he wants? And I think that's maybe the more difficult thing, because it's kind of like, if I knew God wanted me to do something, I would have no doubt to go do it. But then, yeah, like we know that God says that if you have enough faith, you could tell a mountain to go be tossed into the sea. But But does he want the mountain to be tossed into the sea? Like, does he want the one by your house to be tossed in the sea? I don't know that he does. So I think that that's kind of more like the more difficult thing about these situations. I don't know.
And what, if we're in the little season, which, I think we are, does any of that stuff, what does that stuff change? I mean, you know what I mean? We're in a completely different age.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Completely different age. I mean, we're not given enough information about how all this works in the little season. We know how it worked in Jesus' day and the disciples and apostles' time, but is some of that changed because we're now in Satan's short season? I mean, you know what I mean? We're living.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I think the whole point is like that. Even like there was prophets, like in the Old Testament, there were certain prophets that did miracles, and certain prophets are never mentioned to have done miracles.
Right.
Did they believe any less than the other prophets that did the miracles? I mean, only God knows that. I mean, but I guess the point is like that God told them to go do certain things, and they did it. Obviously, when in the Bible, when people are doing miracles, it's still unusual because people don't, they're very impressed when they see the miracles. So it's not totally normal for that to happen. But I mean, we know, like, again, I do think about when you read the New Testament again, and I just finished James, and I'm reading again, and it's like it's so obvious, like when the apostles are talking about this being the end times.
Yeah.
So like when Peter, when the Holy Spirit descends on them on the day of Pentecost, he's saying, in the last days, there's gonna be an outpouring of my Spirit. And then there's going to be people who are going to be prophesying. They're going to be seeing visions and dreams, and they're going to be healing people. And so that's what happens. And so obviously there was a very specific, powerful outpouring of the Holy Spirit to do certain things. Now, I mean, to me, it makes sense that like, because that happened, maybe that was unusual, and it wasn't meant to be like that forever.
Right.
And maybe that's part of like the whole, I've rationalized it in my brain, at least. So like I've made sense of the little season of like, why don't we know more about it? Why would God allow the devil to deceive people? Faith, I guess, like, I guess it makes sense that like, cause God could have showed up the whole time, anytime, physically manifest to people all the time. But then they wouldn't be able to have faith in him. Again, like, yes, it's not really faith. It's like Jesus saying to Thomas, like, blessed are you who have seen, but more blessed are those who have believed and not seen.
Exactly.
So it's like we're living in that time where, yeah, we really have to choose what's right based on our faith. And I mean, it's tough. I mean, like, I'll say it's tough. Like, I wish there was more clear guidelines what to do and how to be, and like, yeah, what we're supposed to do in this little season. It's very strange to kind of navigate this, and I guess in a lot of ways, I do think it's kind of cool to think that we're reading the Bible now in a different way than people have read it. I mean, at least I haven't heard people write about. It's kind of like that. Isn't it interesting to think about? Like, I heard somebody trying to dissect the little season doctrine, and they were saying this is a new thing, and I thought that's kind of weird to think that it's a new thing, because let's just say for a minute it's not true. We're not in the little season. It would still be weird that nobody's thought that they were in the little season.
Yeah. Because it's in the Bible and it's been there.
Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you think that that's all the weird eschatologies people have? Don't you think it would be weird that nobody's ever talked about the little season until very recently?
That is weird.
It is weird.
Almost like it's by design weird.
Yeah, I almost feel like that. I almost feel like it's almost more likely to be true, because it's like, that is really weird that if for 2,000 years, like, let's just say Jesus did come back in the first century, that, well, I mean, if anything, maybe, well, just think about it like this. If the timeline has been manipulated, like a lot of us believe, that some time, let's just say it was 1,000 years. What if 1,000 years was added to our timeline, and this is the year 1024 and not 2024? What if maybe that would be the first time people would say, hey, you think we're in the little season? Because the people during when the devil was bound, they would not have been likely to think that. They would be less likely to think about it, because they'd be like, the things don't seem like, they don't see so topsy-turvy like how we experience things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was gonna make a comment too, and it kind of goes with the whole like deception, little season thing, and kind of going back to what we were previously talking about, just what are we supposed to do, and just about our closeness with God and stuff. But I was listening to your episode like a couple weeks ago, probably, with that girl. She used to be like a New Ager or like some
Angela.
sort of, yeah. And so this is what gets me, because I was talking about like, us doing miracles and stuff like that, and like, do we not have enough faith or whatever? Because like, you can get people like Angela, who was in that deep, and a lot of these people, they're communicating with something else, and they're literally, it's like they have power, like, to manipulate this reality or something like that, just to kind of make people do certain things and not do certain things or whatever. You know what I'm kind of talking about. But just the same, like on the opposite side of that spectrum, people who actually believe in God and in Jesus and stuff like that, they may not have the same, I guess, if you want to call it, success when trying to connect with God and stuff. And I've always wondered why the enemy is so willing to show himself and to almost like flex his muscles, but sometimes God doesn't work that way, in our own lives, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, it makes sense. I've thought that same thing, like a bunch of. I've wondered about that a lot. I don't have any answers. I've also wondered why, if we're really in the year 2024, which I don't believe we are, why have there been no new prophets? Why hasn't there been a single prophet in 2,000 years? If we're still waiting on the return of Christ, why hasn't not sent any prophets? No new books, no new scriptures have been written. It's strange.
Greg Locke is now an apostle, so
The 13th.
You know, you have guys like Kenneth Copeland, and you know,
Yeah.
no, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we joke, but no, that's true. I've said the same thing, because you think about, like, if the prophets were reinforcing, basically the interesting part is, like, so you have the Torah, you have where Moses is given these prophecies that are going to happen, and obviously he's already prophesying about Babylon before they even get into the land. I mean, it's kind of insane. I said that's how that's how a lot of people, you should know that the Bible's true, is because if you only wrote 5 books, right? So these are the first 5 books. It's not really a happy ending, is it? It's like they do get the land, but literally Moses is prophesying. God's telling him to say, they are going to rebel, and I am going to take this land from them. And so what the prophets have did from there, they basically repeat the same prophecy Moses is telling them. You know, so it's like, it's interesting, like when Jeremiah is prophesying about the captivity, and Hananiah is like saying, oh, no, it's not going to be like that. Things are going to be good. And Jeremiah is saying, you know, if that's true, praise God. But just so you know, you've prophesied different than all the other prophets. And so, like, the same way that, why wouldn't it be the same way that if these prophecies were still to come about this coming tribulation, why wouldn't God continue to be sending his prophets to reinforce the upcoming tribulation that's coming?
Exactly.
Because it already happened.
It already came.
Because that's, I think that's the only thing that really makes any sense. It's like the prophecies about, like, this different part of the world that is related to this very specific part of this world in the Bible. The more you read it, it's like, it is pretty comical when people say, you know what? I remember people saying this a long time ago, you know, America's not mentioned in the Bible. It's almost like that we are so, like, self-centered, where it's like, what? How could it not be? You know what I mean? Like, have you ever thought, like, I mean, I know that lots of us probably, the first time we heard that, the America's not mentioned. You know that? It's almost like that. I remember when that was first told to me, it was almost like that America's going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why this would not be mentioned in the Bible. Here's another option, because this was not written in the times of America. This was written well before America, and this was written to this specific part of the world.
Yeah.
And it makes way more sense with that mindset. And you don't have to add all these weird things, these caveats about what this could mean. What could this mean in 2024? Nah, I mean, it's all straightforward right there. And it's like, gosh, it makes perfect sense. I can really do have to wonder, like, that so much of this stuff, and, you know, I do feel like I cut us a little bit of slack, like, because we were told a certain way. But when you see it, gosh, it's like so clear that this is written to them. The 70 weeks of Daniel is all related to the times of Jesus. The apostles know when he says he's coming back in their lifetimes. That's why they keep repeating that it's going to be now. In the book of Hebrews, what he said, the beginning of Hebrews starts out with, you know, there was a time where God spoke to his people through his prophets, but here in the last days, he spoke to us through his son. And then the same thing in James. I know he literally says in the last days, even like in Timothy, when 2 times Paul tells him, you know, the Spirit says in the last days that there's going to be doctrines of devils. And then he says later to him, he says, in the last days, people are going to be this. They're going to be this. They're going to be ungrateful. They're going to, you know, be rebellious. They're going to be idolatrous. And he's like, have nothing to do with these people. It's almost like that. Okay, so in the last days, people are going to be like this. Don't have anything to do with those people, Timothy.
Yeah.
Okay, because he's talking to them. He's talking to Timothy that they're living in the last days. It's like, you know, it really is like a smack yourself on the head. You're like, how did I never see this like in the same light before?
Yeah. And I was talking to Daniel Collier. You had him on your show a while back, and I had brought up that verse in Thessalonians where it's talking about this man of sin, the son of perdition, and it's talking about that spirit of Antichrist or something like that, and it's basically saying that it's already at work, like right now, and he's talking about it like in the present. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well,
And
I
so
started
it's
to wonder. I thought like when people say who's the Antichrist, and the interesting thing about the Book of Revelation, it never mentions the Antichrist.
No.
It mentions a beast. It mentions the Apollyon, who would be referred to as the destroyer. Even Nebuchadnezzar is called the destroyer, in the times of like the first captivity. I think that what it was is I think that you had this spirit, this demonic spirit that came out of this pit, and it possessed the kings of Rome. And so like whatever, like, so there's not necessarily a specific Antichrist. The spirit of Antichrist is at work.
Yeah.
So the spirit of Antichrist is possessing these men, and then they are going to be the destroyer for God. God is going to use these men to destroy the whore during this thing. And it's like, that makes a lot of sense. I even thought about like in Thessalonians too, when he's saying like you're not going to miss the day of the Lord because these things have to come first. And the first thing he mentions is the rebellion. Well, I know it says, I think, apostasy in the King James, but in the ESV it says the rebellion. And I started to think about it. So what if the rebellion they're talking about is like the Jews rebelled against the Romans? And so then even says later that there's this strong delusion that's going to come over them. And I remember when we talked about the works of Josephus, when he's saying like that these people really thought they were going to be saved, like fighting against the Romans, like because they believed in these same prophecies that led up to the 70 weeks. They knew the timeline. I think that's also why Jesus had no time for these people, because like they would have known the prophecy for Daniel. They would have known the 70 weeks. They knew to expect a Messiah. And then so when they were rejecting him, it was kind of like, well, you're not the one we want. We want something that we want the earthly king who's going to conquer these Romans. So we don't want you. And so to me, it makes sense like that if this strong delusion, and so you have this rebellion, then you have this strong delusion, and the delusion is literally forcing these Jews to fight so hard against these Romans where they're literally going to be destroyed. Because it's kind of like the Romans, obviously, if they could, because they obviously were in control of this whole territory, it was like of no advantage to them to destroy a place completely like they did. Especially like a city like Jerusalem would have had this historic city, this historic temple. Why would they want to rule over ashes?
Yeah, they could have.
I don't think they would have.
It.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it's not like the Romans. The Romans didn't go in just to destroy people and then just burn places down. They were trying to rule the world. They weren't trying to just destroy places. So like, yeah. So the fact that they did that, it was only because it was like, the unstoppable force versus the unmovable object, and like, so they're going till the end, till it literally ended in like the worst time ever. The worst time the world's ever seen. And I think like, you know what, that, I mean, to me, it makes a lot of sense. I forgot. I just read it again. I know Paul was saying something about, I think he was even saying like, maybe it was, I forgot which book it was. It was basically saying like that the Jews were kind of in tribulation when he was talking. It was like, it must have been like probably close to the end of his life, because he was saying like that God's wrath is already happening to them. I have to look that up. I'll figure out where that is. I'll have to find that for you guys.
Yeah, I'm not quite remembering where that is, but
I kind of remember reading that though. I know what he's talking about, where he basically was saying that even now we're in tribulation, something like that.
Yeah, it was something similar to that. I was actually really surprised that I said like that again. If you're not looking for these things, I guess this is how you can miss them. Yeah.
Well, Revelations, and like, was it one of the first chapter? I know it's one of the first 3 chapters where he says that to that one church that they are in tribulation, doesn't he? I don't know how he words it. You see, I know thy tribulation and thy works and all this. So he said, I know you're in tribulation. Be faithful until I come, and you'll get a crown of life. Endure till the end, and he was telling them that, you know, the end is near. It's at the doors. It's now.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to find another time.
Yeah.
You know, I want to bring this up before I forget about it, though. To go all the way back to the cryptids and the weird stuff underground, and even the camouflaged monsters. This movie is going to actually, like I said, I wish I'd have brought it up right when we talked about it, but we changed gears into a much better topic, so I couldn't bring it up then.
Yeah.
All right, the movie Monsters Inc.
Oh,
So
yeah.
just think about this movie. So as we were talking about all the weird stuff about, like, for one, Bigfoots. So the main kind of monster in that is that thing. Was it John Goodman, Sully? What does he look like?
Sasquatch.
Bigfoot.
He looks like a Bigfoot. He's got horns. Then you have the one guy, Randall. He's like the chameleon guy, and he literally changes. You know, he can obviously adapt to whatever environment he's in. And like literally in the movie, they're in this other place, and they use these doorways to enter into our world. And what they do when they get here is they scare people and collect energy for their city that's some other place.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like kind of like exactly what we were talking about. Like if you think about it, like in the movie, obviously it's like some alternate dimension, which I guess it could be if these are spiritual beings. But what if
Yeah.
they're not? If they weren't spiritual beings and they were literally just physical beings, that alternate dimension could literally just be inside the earth, and they
Yeah.
have access points to our realm.
Well, the
via
door analogy there is crazy as well, because isn't that what we all say, like, don't open up any doors for this or that, you know what I mean? Like if you do a certain thing, you might open up doors that you know what I mean? It's just that door
Mhm.
analogy where it's like, you know, to another place that this other thing comes from, you know what I'm saying, that you don't want.
Well, you know, it's interesting too in that in the like the Lord of the Rings movies, you have the very first one. They want the dwarf wants them to go in the mines of Moria, which, interestingly enough, Mount Moria is where the temple was.
Mm.
You know,
Oh, man.
in Jerusalem, yeah. So I wondered, like Tolkien, I'm sure he probably was. He was thinking some kind of Templar thing. So like the dwarves tunneled into this mountain, and of course in the movie, like they go down into these things, and there's like these epic stone creations. It's literally a city under the ground. And of course, like in the main dwarf's mind, it's like there's this great place down there. It's like epic. There's gonna be parties. They're gonna be drinking ale and eating meat right off the bone. But then when they go down there, they're all dead. All the goblins and whatever killed them. And then I think what the one wizard is like, I'm like telepathically talking to Gandalf, and he's saying, you know, what they found, they dug too deep. And when they dug too deep, they unleashed that kind of like that shadow and fire demon thing.
Yeah.
What if it's like that? What if it is? What if these people did dig too deep? And that's the kind of stuff that's the doors they opened to different dimensions. And even when you were saying there's orbs, I think it's interesting. Like if you watch like the Peter Pan movie, right? When Tinkerbell is first shown in these movies, like before you realize it's a little kind of like cute little girl with wings, she's just shown as an orb.
Yeah.
She just
Yeah.
shows up as this little ball of light. And then when she lands, then you can see what she is. But it's like, but she's shown as an orb. So I've often wondered, it's like, what if that is just, those things literally are just this, like that's what they're showing you. That's a fairy.
Yeah.
It's, you know, like, but we just see it as a ball of light.
It could be. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of times these orbs that people are seeing too, it's like they're sentient too. It's not like this random thing. Like they can actually interact with this orb, so it has some sort of intelligence too. So it's almost like what you're saying, another being or something that's not within our current reality that we accept. You know, there's obviously things out there that are being withheld from us, and disclosure hasn't happened despite all the eyewitness testimonies.
Of
Have you
course, in
guys?
that movie too, you have the Tinkerbell is kind of like the scout that goes before Peter Pan. So Peter Pan is the one who ends up kidnapping the kids, or taking them on a fun adventure, or whatever you say. But like, Tinkerbell is kind of like the one who goes spies it out, and then later Peter Pan comes afterwards. So maybe that's the same way you were saying, like that when you have these kind of cryptid encounters, there's the orbs first, and then you have the being afterwards.
Yeah.
Have you guys saw those videos? I'm sure you have on TikTok of the ball, what they call ball lightning, and
I don't think so. No.
You haven't seen that, dude? It's just like this big bright orb, and it's like bright as lightning, and you can tell it's like electrical kinda, and you can even hear it in one of the videos. But there's like two different videos I've seen on it. One of them, it goes across train tracks, and as it crosses the train tracks, like sparks are flying, and it's like shooting electricity because the tracks are metal. But it seems to be self-guiding. This what they call ball lightning. Anyways, and there's another video where one comes in these people's house. They got their bedroom window open, and it just comes right in, and it goes by the TV and zaps the TV, and the TV like blows up or shuts off, and then it turns the corner and goes down the hall.
That sounds insane.
It's super weird and insane. But if you go read the comments, everybody's like, "Oh, that's just ball lightning." It's totally explainable
Totally
through
normal.
science. Totally normal ball lightning.
I've already replaced 2 TVs because of the random ball lightning. It's totally normal.
Yeah, it's totally normal. It just knew to come in through my bedroom window. No big deal. But yeah, look that up. It's super weird.
I'm gonna have to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, buddy, it's been a great episode so far. I know that we didn't get to talk about everything that we wanted to. Obviously, it's hard to pack everything in 90 minutes or so, but I guess we're gonna have to bring you on again, right? We were supposed to talk about Meltology and all that, and we didn't even get to that. Maybe you can give them a little sneak previews, and then we'll get you on to talk about that again next time.
Yeah, well, it's funny because in this kind of conversation about like potentially if Armageddon has come, the day of the Lord has come. Obviously, that comes with fervent heat, God's all-consuming fire and that kind of thing. And I think that was probably, I know when the first podcast I did with Alpha Talks about the little season, that was some of the best evidence he had was like places like Cappadocia, Turkey, that it's very clear that place was not a normal mountain. They didn't dig holes into the mountain. Like those places, it looks like that was once a structure, and now they look like rocks melted like candle wax. And so when I started to have this fascination with that stuff, and I said I had a fascination with the western part of the United States, I looked into the Grand Canyon, very strange place, but then there's all kinds of places in Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, California, Arizona, all that place all around there. There's the weirdest rock formations. And I've done a few videos, and I found some of this evidence, and there's a really good YouTube account called named John Levi. He does a lot of great research into this kind of stuff about meltology. He shows different degrees of like, okay, so here's like, you kind of like go to like a good example is like Sedona in Arizona, and it just looks like cool red mountains, but they look different than just red mountains. Like the places I just went to so I literally just went to the Valley of Fire, and that's outside of Las Vegas, and cool red mountains. But there's evidence like places like San Francisco. I found an interesting video where there was like a brick in places like that. It's kind of like that you see things that are completely just destroyed beyond recognition, but then there's partial preservation in spots. where you can find bricks. And it kind of blew me away that what if a lot of those red mountains are literally just like clumps of bricks, like gigantic buildings that were like just melted beyond belief. And now it's like, oh, that's a cool red mountain. Like it was not a mountain. But there's not like, you can't see a door and windows in there anymore because it's literally just it was so destroyed. And so I went out with my wife last week. We went to Utah, we went to Nevada, and I saw this really cool place in it was called Snow Canyon. It's outside of St. George in Utah. And there was places where like there was volcanic activity and like, but I could see like where there was red melted looking things, and then I could even see like a black scorched surface on them. And then there was places that were just black and just looked like it did. Of course, it's funny, and like you're reading like the pamphlet about the place, and it said, well, a volcano went off here 27,000 years ago. And I'm like, oh, that's, you sure it wasn't 26,000 or 25,000? So it was 27,000 years. Maybe it was 28,000.
Yeah.
Sounds good, right?
Give or take.
But I mean, the point is like there's really no way to know. And I just started to think like, you go out those places and you're like, I know it in my soul that there was something that really, really bad happened there. And I hate to say that that's part of why I like going to these places and looking to, because it is just like, it's really just like my mind is like, what happened here? Yeah. Like, it. And it's interesting that there's lots of mythologies about these places, that they're very spiritual places. And then the Native Americans got their petroglyphs on these places. And I just can't help but think, yeah, there's something significant about these places. And if it was like a time of, obviously, I mean, if it's melted like from God's wrath, then who knows what took place in these places? Yeah, it caused like literally fire to rain down from heaven, like Sodom and Gomorrah and stuff like that. I wonder. I do wonder. Like, I do think that like I believe, like like you guys believe, that the demonic activity is still obviously very prevalent today. If a place like that was significant, it would have been significant for many generations, and who knows, maybe there is something about that there.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting topic, and when we get you on again, I'd love to dig more into that, because there's just so much evidence of that all over the place. And you get into the whole Lichtenberg figures, and it's just it starts to be very obvious that something happened in the past. And even on our known land, it seems like a third of it is desert. Like, it's all burned up. Nothing grows there anymore. Yeah. Kind of like it says in the Bible, strangely enough.
Strangely. Yeah.
Yeah. But you got any closing statements, Shane?
No, I don't think I do. It's been a really good episode, and I'm looking forward to bringing JT back on and talking about the Meltology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure, man. Well, it's always a blessing, always a great conversation with you, bro. And we love you. And hopefully we'll get you back on very soon and question the narrative, everyone. And God bless.
God bless.
God bless, guys.
Come closer, my child.